You know, when you think about the great library of history, some books are more than just books. They're explosions. They don't just tell you what happened, they completely change how we think about the past itself. Today, we're going to crack open one of those revolutionary texts, a masterpiece written out of sheer frustration almost 1,300 years ago, and one that rewrote the rules for telling history forever.
I mean, it's a question we all have to ask ourselves, right? We read the books, we watch the documentaries, but how much of what we're getting is the actual unvarnished truth? And how much of it is just a really well-told story? And more importantly, who gets to decide which story we all hear?
So, imagine this, one guy surrounded by this mountain of official histories, these sacred texts that literally defined his entire world, and he just decides it's time to start digging. His name was Liu Zhiji, and he was about to put the entire past on trial.
So who was this guy who decided to take on centuries of accepted truth? Well, the funny thing is, he wasn't some outsider throwing stones. He was an insider, a court historian, working right at the very heart of the system he was about to criticize.
This is Liu Zhiji. He was a total prodigy who spent something like 3 decades working in the imperial archives. His own colleagues described his personality as rigid and difficult, which, let's be honest, is probably exactly the kind of personality you need to question everything. He wasn't there just to copy old scrolls. He was there to interrogate them.
So what was his motivation? This was not some quiet academic project. He literally said he wrote this book out of indignation, out of a righteous, burning anger. He was just completely fed up with the sloppy, biased, myth-filled histories that he had to deal with every single day.
And that frustration led to this revolutionary idea. For him, an ancient text wasn't some sacred object you put on a pedestal. No, it was evidence. Potentially flawed evidence from a crime scene. And the historian who wrote it, they weren't a perfect channel to the past. They were a witness with their own agenda, their own blind spots. He was about to be history's first great detective.
All right, so if you're a history detective, where do you even begin your investigation? Well, Liu Zhiji didn't start with some minor detail. He went straight for the jugular, the most foundational, sacred stories of his entire culture, in a section of his book he brazenly called Doubts About Antiquity.
I mean, just think about the sheer nerve of this. These weren't just old kings. They were the mythical founders of Chinese civilization itself. Think of them like George Washington, King Arthur, and a saint all rolled into one. And Liu Zhiji was about to start poking some serious holes in their perfect legends.
He just starts laying out all the parts of the story that don't make sense. He asks, okay, if the Sage King Shun was the absolute model of family loyalty, how do you explain that his father was supposedly evil and his brother was a monster? The official story just doesn't add up. Then he brings up other, less popular records that say Shun actually imprisoned the old king to get the throne. And finally, he questions Shun's death in the middle of nowhere, pointing out that, historically, that's where you send rulers you've overthrown, not where beloved kings go to retire.
You can just feel the sarcasm dripping from this quote. He's basically saying the official story of this perfect golden age is so full of contradictions that it just can't be true. He was using cold, hard logic to argue that these sacred stories weren't really history. They were myths built to serve a purpose, not to record what actually happened.
So after taking a hammer to the founding myths, Liu Zhiji turned his critical eye to something even more sacred, the Confucian classics themselves, and specifically the famous historical text known as the Spring and Autumn Annals.
In this part of his book, he basically exposes the text's hidden political agenda. He's asking these incredibly pointed questions like, hey, why are some assassinations recorded, but others, maybe ones involving our allies, are just conveniently left out? And why do we judge the rulers from our home state so differently from rulers of other states? He saw that history wasn't just being recorded, it was being shaped and manipulated by the author's own loyalties. The pen, he realized, was a political weapon.
But here's what makes Liu Zhiji so important. He wasn't just a critic. He didn't want to just tear everything down. He wanted to build something better. A huge part of his book, the Shitong, is actually a systematic professional guide for how history should be written.
He was the first person to ever really analyze and categorize all the different ways you could write history. He basically created a toolkit for every historian who came after him. If you want to record official speeches, he says, use the Shangshu style. If you need to tell a detailed, compelling story, you should use the Zuozhuan style. For the very first time, he was giving historians a formal language to talk about their own craft.
And he went even deeper, looking at the very structure of a historical story. He broke it down into two main forms. First, there's the analytic form, which is just a strict timeline. A happened, then B, then C. It's great for showing what happened and when. But then you have the biographical form, which follows the lives of key people. This one is much better at explaining why things happened, because it reveals character, motive, and context. This proves he wasn't just a fact-checker, he was a brilliant theorist of storytelling itself.
So why on earth should we care about a 1,300-year-old book on Chinese history today? Well, because the principles that Liu Zhiji laid out are, frankly, more important now than they have ever been.
His book wasn't just about how to write history well. It was really about how to think clearly about any information you receive. You could call it a manual for intellectual self-defense against propaganda, bias, and all those comforting lies we like to tell ourselves.
I mean, his rules are completely timeless. Whether you're reading an ancient text or scrolling through a news feed on your phone, his advice is spot on. Question your sources. Always ask who is telling the story and what their motive might be. Learn to separate what's a documented fact from what's just a convenient story. And always, always pay attention to how the story is being told, because that structure is designed to make you feel a certain way.
And all of this leaves us with one last, pretty challenging question. Liu Zhiji looked back at his culture's golden age and saw that it was just a myth, a construct. So, what accepted truths, what national myths, what perfect heroes of our own time will be taken apart by the Liu Zhijis of the future? That's definitely something worth thinking about.